Are you a VR gamer? And do you just not understand why home consoles get these incredible games that constantly rival all other mediums in terms of visual fidelity, storytelling and entertainment? So why is it that we don't see the same efforts happening in our VR worlds? It's too common we get 2-hour-long games or visuals that are reminiscent of the PlayStation 2 that just leave us unsatisfied. I just want to finish a game and be taken back, like I have been with Spider-Man, Uncharted 4, God of War and Horizon Zero Dawn. So in this video I will take you through why I think this happens in VR and what changes need to occur before we start seeing AAA virtual titles that make us question our own reality. First is investment and risk. The history of virtual reality is a rocky one. There have been many attempts at creating stereoscopic gaming products and they haven't been successful. You may have heard of the Virtual Boy, which in less than a year of its release was discontinued. It sold 770,000 units in the 5 months it was available in Japan and 8 months in North America. Also seen Sega making an attempt at this, who did not even leave the prototype phase. During the same period, Nintendo's home console, the SNES, sold 49 million units, which is more than the Xbox One and the Nintendo Switch are selling at this moment. That means VR sold a measly 1.6% compared to the home console at the time. Let's do some maths that isn't completely accurate because more variables clearly exist, but let's entertain it. I'll choose a game that really made me go wow about how beautiful the world looked, and that's Detroit Become Human. That game only cost $37 million to develop, which is nothing compared to the likes of Call of Duty, Destiny and God of War. This title sold over 2 million copies, with around 50 a game, that is 100 million. If we take the percentage difference between VR and the system sold at the last point gaming really tried to push VR before the modern day, which we had recently just discovered was 1.6%, our return would be 1.6 million on a £37 million game. That is not a good investment. Obviously today this is much higher, but it hasn't changed as drastically as you'd think. This is the headspace a lot of corporate directors are in and they will not risk it. Next is system adoption, which we partly covered just now in investments. This doesn't bode well for people wanting to create modern day HMDs, as there wouldn't be a return on their investment. It seemed VR was in the shadows for a long time. That was until 2012 the Kickstarter campaign arose asking for $250,000 to create the Oculus Rift. The campaign reached 10 times its expected goal. This highlighted a demand in the community. This product wasn't available for consumer use until 2016, which was only 3 years ago. During this time, mobile VR content was on the rise with the release of Google Cardboard and the Samsung Gear headset, which made use of the Oculus software. This allowed users to turn their phones into stereoscopic displays, and they sold 5 million units of the Gear VR. This was huge, but it also meant people were saturating the mobile VR market with anything that could gain revenue. I feel like this culture has stuck. The simple VR games that just do enough to constitute a release are everywhere. Home consoles have been thriving for nearly 40 years. Virtual reality has only been gaining its VR legs for the past 3 years. There is a big growing gap. PSVR has sold over 4.2 million units. The PlayStation 4 has 91 million units sold. That's a 5% difference, which is 3 times better than it was previously. So we are slowly growing and gaining VR adoption, and hopefully the Quest will make an even bigger dent because it's an extremely user-friendly device. Until more people have VR systems, we won't get the time and the investment for these bigger and better titles. So let's continue to support. Next, consumer knowledge. A factor of this is educating the consumer, which is where the consumer needs to learn what the product is, why they want it, and what it does before they feel they need to purchase it. As previously mentioned, home consoles have been around mainstream for nearly 40 years. The generation at that time at mass also did not adopt or buy into the home console market. It gained a stereotype of being for children, which we're still trying to fight to this day. But now those kids have grown up and have the understanding about what the product is, what it provides, and why they want it. Now virtual reality is at that same phase where the consumer at mass don't understand it and think it's a gimmick. But but as us adopters continue to support and further educate the consumer, it will provide this change. This is how they try to drive marketing. They want to educate the consumer into why they want it, not just simply tell them that they want it. Next is the hardware. Of course, this is always going to be a factor of limitations, as it's what's used to produce the immersive experiences we desire. It's no secret that virtual reality is very intensive on our hardware. It's got to not only essentially run 2 games at once, one screen for each eye, to provide us with the depth of field, it has to track real-world movement, processing camera data in real time. Our expectations at this point for the early stages of the VR's life cycle is high, but we will get there. Not only this, games in VR have to run at a minimum rate of 72 frames a second at 1440p or higher, otherwise we get jutter, which provides more motion sickness and huge pixels because we're so close to the screen. Normal games on home consoles can run at 30 or 60 if we're lucky at 1080p. They don't need to support higher frames or resolutions. This is a huge factor into why visuals we get on the VR are much less than our console counterparts. So as hardware increases for VR, so does it increase for our home consoles, so it may always be the case that we're trying to chase the unreachable dream of having the same graphical fidelity. Next is expectations. This is related to the question of, have you ever wondered why games have gotten bigger and better, but they still cost the same amount as they did 30 years ago? This is because of customer expectation. We will not buy a game if it comes out at £80 because we're used to and expect the £50 price point. This is something that really worries me about virtual reality, because games at their peak are at a £30 price point. This is now our expectation, which is nearly half the cost of a console title. Developers go into making a game with this in mind and aim to make something that can cater for the tiny percentage of people who adopt the system, run on the limited hardware we have available in our homes, and set to make a good amount of profit for their efforts. All of these factors contribute to why we don't see AAA VR titles. The next reason, no one has done it right yet. This, for me, if this occurs, can take all of the other excuses we have just mentioned and throw them out the window. Just like T for God with its locomotion in finite space. It's incredible. If just one game comes out and provides us with beautiful graphics, a compelling story, fluid gameplay, and game time that lasts over 4 hours, even at a price point higher than 30, let's bring it to 50, if it can provide us that experience, will make such a difference. A great example of this is the SNES period. We had 2D games for multiple generations until one day we didn't. Thanks to the Super Effects chip, we got 3D games after 3D games, and think about how terrible they looked back then. Mario 64 is nearly unplayable to today's standards. We also don't have defined standards about gameplay in VR at the moment. Like way back when the NES first came out, it defined a standard for movement using a D-pad. But in VR at the moment, we have all these different ways to traverse. There's such a myriad of options. But this all comes with maturity, so have hope, continue to support VR, and we will make it. I hope this has helped anyone with any questions they may have had about this, hopefully gained some understanding and humility about the industry. I hope you enjoyed the video. Happy gaming, guys. Good day.